most people, they drive through the mountains above Boulder, and they never realize that they're passing one of the places that helped start the Colorado Gold Rush, Gold Hill. Now today it's quiet, right? It's got a handful of buildings, the pine trees, mountain roads winding, through all this old mining ground. But back in 1859, this place exploded. And, if you really want to understand why Colorado still has gold today, then you have to understand what happened right here. So let's rewind the clock. Let's go to 1858. Now, gold has been discovered along the South Platte and Cherry Creek near what would become Denver, right? And the news spreads fast across the frontier and even faster across the eastern United States. Within months, right, you have thousands of men all heading towards the Rocky Mountains. Now, they're all chasing rumors, okay? Gold rumors. And rumor, it has a gravity to it. It pulls men across plains, over mountains, and, into places that they have never seen before. At first, the gold being found is placer gold, right? The loose gold that has broken out of the mountains and washed down into the creeks and riverbeds. But prospectors know something important, okay? Placer gold almost always means there is a hard rock source somewhere upstream. So what do? They start climbing up into the foothills, higher, further into the Front Range. And that's where Gold Hill enters the story. In January of 1859, there was a prospector whose name was George A. Jackson, and he climbs into the mountains west of what is now present-day Boulder. Now, Jackson had already been prospecting all around and up and down the Front Range, so he knew the signs, right? He knew what to look for. And somewhere near what is now Gold Hill, okay, he finds it. Real gold in the rock. Not just flakes down in the creek, right? Hard rock gold. Now, that discovery changes everything because it's the first major low gold discovery in Colorado. So the moment that news spreads, miners begin flooding into the mountains above Boulder, just moving with force. And Gold Hill becomes the first real mining town in the Colorado mountains. So imagine what it looked like, right? You have cabins just going up overnight. You have tents scattered across the hillsides. You have the stamp mills that are built and pounding ore just day and night. And you've got men hauling rock down extremely steep wagon roads. Black powder blasts, right? Just echoing through the canyons. And the sound that every miner wants to hear, right? That metallic of gold just hitting the bottom of your pan. Well, Gold Hill, it quickly becomes one of the busiest places in the entire territory. And by the early 1860s, the district is now producing serious gold. But the problem is, mining hard rock in the 1850s, you guys, that was brutally difficult. Ore had to be crushed by stamp mills. Mercury, right, was being used to capture the gold. And the transportation was slow and very dangerous. And not to mention, right, winter in the Rockies, that could shut entire operations just down. But the gold was real. And where gold is real, towns grow fast, right? So Gold Hill develops the full personality of a frontier mining camp, okay? The saloons, the gambling halls, the boarding houses, and the rough mixture of fortune hunters, drifters, and entrepreneurs that defined mining towns all across the West. Now, law enforcement in those days was very, very thin. Money moved extremely fast, and you guys, trouble just followed it. So you had shootings, right? There was drunken brawls, you had brawls, you had claim disputes, and this was all stuff that was extremely common in those early years. And it's because when men believe a mountain is full of gold, you guys, patience disappears. Everybody wants the richest ground right now. But Gold Hill wasn't just a rough mining camp, okay? It also became one of the earliest industrial mining centers in all of Colorado. So in 1861, the Gold Hill Mill begins operating. And this is one of the first stamp mills in the region that's actually capable of processing hard rock ore, right? So ore from the surrounding mines was then hauled to the mill where the heavy iron stamps just crushed the rock into powder. Now, the gold was then separated using mercury amalgamation. Definitely primitive, extremely dangerous, and just absolutely incredibly inefficient by our modern standards, which is why this is important, okay? Because it actually means something. A lot of gold escaped those early systems, right? So you had the fine gold, the flour gold, gold that, washed away in the tailings piles and creek sediment. In other words, gold, the old timers, never recovered. So Gold Hill also carries some pretty interesting legends, and a little strange, because mining camps were full of rumors always about hidden gold. And Gold Hill also had its share. There's one pretty persistent story, right? And it tells of this miner who struck a pocket of incredibly rich ore just somewhere in the surrounding hills. It was so rich that he supposedly, packed the gold out quietly rather than, revealing the location. Now, the story says that he just left the district suddenly and that the location of the pocket was never found again. So whether that story is true or not, that's a whole nother matter, okay? Mining districts are all full of legends like that. But sometimes those legends exist because someone actually did find something. Another strange chapter in Gold Hill history, it arrives early in the 1870s, right? There was a man by the name of Stephen Hill, and he begins experimenting with different smelting techniques while he's in the district. And he developed to them what was a new method for processing ores that contain complex metals like tellurium. Now, you guys, those ores were and still are extremely difficult for miners to process, right? But Hill's smelting technology, it unlocked more of the district's value. And suddenly, you have gold that had been trapped inside complicated ores becoming recoverable now. And this is actually a pattern that we see all over mining history, right? So you have a new technology that suddenly makes old ground profitable again. Ground that miners once just abandoned suddenly, now all of a sudden it just comes back to life. And the mountains above Gold Hill are all full of that kind of ground because the geology of Gold Hill is complicated. It really is. Deep underground, we had hydrothermal fluids, and they pushed all that gold-bearing mineral into the fractures in the rock. Now, over time, okay, those veins were cracked open by the weather, okay? Just broken apart by the freeze and thaw. Well, we also had the glaciers, right? Glaciers grounded down. And so slowly gold was carried downhill by the water. And that process, it's never stopped. It's going on right now while you're watching this video, which means pieces of those old veins, well, they're still working their way down into the creeks today. Tiny flakes, fine gold, sometimes nuggets. I've personally pulled nuggets out of Left Hand Canyon, but that gold is always moving. And then there are the lost places, because if you spend enough time around the old mining districts, things start popping up in your face that you notice, right? The maps, they don't always match reality, okay? Mines collapse, records disappear so easily, right? And that way, old claims, they become forgotten. And sometimes entire workings can just vanish back into the mountain. Gold Hill has dozens of abandoned mines that are scattered through the hills, okay? Some of them are sealed, okay? Some of them have collapsed, and some are just simply lost. But every one of them part of that long story of men chasing gold through these mountains. Today, when you walk through Gold Hill, man, it feels quiet there. But if you stop for a moment, right, and you really look around, you really take a good look, you can still see the bones of the gold rush. The old foundations, the mine dumps, collapsed adits hidden in the trees, and the creeks, still carrying sediment down towards Boulder. It's the exact same creeks that those first prospectors tested more than 160 years ago. So when people ask me, is there still gold in Colorado? The answer is yes. And it's not because nobody has looked for it, but it's because the system that created the gold, right, it never stopped working. The veins, you guys, they're still in the mountains. Weather is still working on them and breaking them apart. Water is carrying the gold downhill. And thousands, I'm talking thousands of small pockets of gold remain in places that the early miners never saw, or they just couldn't recover. Gold Hill, it helped start the Colorado Gold Rush, okay? But as we all know, the story didn't end there. The mountains, they kept working, and the gold just kept moving. So if you enjoy stories like this, okay, real mining history, lost mines, and the strange legends that are scattered through the Rocky Mountains, okay, well, make sure that you subscribe to the channel, all right? Hit the like button, so the algorithm does its thing, right? I'm not a big computer guy, but I know it's important. And it helps people who care about mining history. And then you guys, those notifications, hit them so you just don't miss the next episode, all right? And, I want to hear from you guys. I really do. So if you've ever been to Gold Hill, okay, if you've prospected around that district, or if you've heard any strange mining stories from that district, from the Gold Hill Mining District, drop them in the comments below, okay? Mining history, it only survives because people keep telling the stories. And, sometimes the best clues are the ones that someone almost forgot to mention. So jump into the conversation below, okay? And until the next episode, keep your eye on the mountains. Because, well, the gold rush, it never truly ended.